Welcome to the Critical Media Studies Podcast. We're your hosts, Mike Rapici
and Barry Falk. Hello, Michael. How are you doing this evening, this Tuesday evening?
Barry, I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing very well, and I am excited to be talking. We're going to do a little bit of is this a palate cleanser, perhaps? I don't know what this is, but it's a little bit of a change of pace. We're going to have a freewheeling conversation. We're not going to talk about apocalypse once. Well, maybe we can't.
We might. I'm not making that promise.
That was silly. This is the Critical Media Studies Podcast, after all. So, apocalypse, our main thing, but ostensibly, possibly. Well, I would say that from one angle, it's not obvious that apocalypse will become the mainstay of this episode. But what we're going to try to do is have a conversation this time, more conversation than analysis, right?
I think so.
More conversation than an analysis about, and we're going to talk about a Substacker I like. He writes for the Bulwark. I guess I do have to mention something about the Bulwark, and I kept this from Michael so that he would read it. Do you know what the Bulwark is? Well, it has become its own media institution, but it's primarily a vehicle, a venue for former conservatives who are against Trump.
Why do I feel like I knew this? I didn't know that, but
but now Sonny Bunch, I think he does trend conservative, but he's sort of affiliated with the Bulwark crowd. But I have found him. So now I'm just going to talk about my own personal relationship with Sonny Bunch. Not because I know him, but just as a reader. He contributes a column and a podcast called Sonny Bunch Hosts The Bulwark Goes to Hollywood. Okay. And so it's a film thing. But what I've found in the last 2-3 years, I guess 2 years since I've been following him, I found that Sonny Bunch is one of the most articulate commentators on, well, obviously he's a film critic and he has a very helpful, and he usually has good co-hosts, et cetera. But the thing about Sonny is that he is very, very savvy about the political economy of movies. He pays a lot of attention, and he spends a lot of time talking about the ways in which streaming has cut into and sort of changed our expectations for film. So along with the movie reviews, there's a lot of what I would call old-fashioned political economy of filmmaking, television consumption, and also streaming. And that, after that long preamble, I will get to the point here and say, we're going to look at a Sonny Bunch column, and it's sort of connected with the podcast, and I guess I'll give you the title of the podcast as well. But the title of the article that we're going to sort of read through is called "The Future of Media is Passive." And we're just going to read this and talk about it.
Yeah. I didn't know about the political affiliations and implications here, but and it is probably for the best, because I don't know how much of an appetite I have for that in my media studies diet. But I will say that this actually, hold on. I need to take a quick pause here. Your sound is very low.
Uh-oh. How about we start again, Michael? I can do that a lot quicker, I think.
Okay.
A lot more compact. I didn't like how I did that. I think it was too elaborate.
That's good. I forgot to start the timer anyway, so
let's just do that again.
But your sound is coming.
I don't know why because I'm pretty loud here. How about now? Can you hear me?
Well, I can hear you, but your voice compared to mine and my microphone is in my headphone is significantly lower.
Okay. How about this now?
That's better, I think. I mean, I apologize if it means you're like hunched over.
It's okay.
I don't want a situation.
I can move the chair. I can move the chair so that I'm not hunched over, but I'm closer to the.
That's better, right there.
Okay.
All
All
right,
right.
shall we start over?
Yeah, let's start again. That was a bad. I didn't like how I opened. I'm going to be much more compact.
Okay, if we're going to do that, I'd also encourage you to remember that this releases on a Friday. So
I
maybe
won't
not
mention
say on a
Tuesday.
Tuesday. We just
I
leave the
won't
date.
mention Tuesday.
And
Sure.
okay,
Sure.
we'll start over.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to stop and just start over again. I'm sorry. So let me count. I'll start again. Hi, Michael. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, Barry, I'm good. I'm like you, I imagine weathering the trials and tribulations at the end of the
The
semester,
end of the term. The end
but
of
we're
the
making
term.
it. We're making
We're
it. How are
making.
you?
I am fine, and I'm excited to talk about a editorial from, I guess, film critic, film blogger, podcaster, Sonny Bunch. And we're going to just do a little bit, we're going to do something a little different. This is not as, I don't know if we'll end up mentioning Heidegger once. We may, but we're not going to pull out the theoretical guns here. We're just going to have a conversation sparked by Sonny Bunch's commentary on streaming and what streaming means for film. And this is an article and podcast that is titled "The Future of Media is Passive." And so we're going to read it, just read through it. It's a short piece and sort of comment on it and try and see if Sonny Bunch has film podcaster Sonny Bunch has something to say to us uh, within the field of critical media studies.
Yeah, I think that's a nice and sort of uncharacteristically succinct
Trying to
introduction.
be
So allow
succinct.
me to just
Yes.
sort of stretch that a moment, lest we totally break form here. Um,
Okay.
I don't know that this is going to be
Oh,
fully theory light. I'm not willing to make that promise.
oh.
I think that there's a lot of connection to a lot of the stuff that we talk about here.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't, as you said, this isn't going to be a discourse on Heidegger, as he,
Well, I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk about our favorite heroes and the folk saints of critical media studies. So I didn't mean non-theoretical in the sense that our references are going to be exclusively
yeah. I
Taylor
mean,
Swift.
if you're playing the
But
Marshall McLuhan drinking game, this episode is
yeah,
still for
this
you.
is still,
Um,
tune in. But I guess what did I mean to say? I meant to say that ostensibly our main topic is we're going to talk about how we interact with streaming. I mean,
yeah, and
yeah,
so I think that's the
streaming media,
it's
right?
a very short piece, and what Barry and I are going to do. Well, I guess what I'm going to do is read it, and it's less than 2 pages long in total. And we're just going to sort of take breaks as we go through to discuss some of the various ideas and arguments that
Yeah,
he's making.
yeah.
Um, just a quick sort of, you know, high level gloss is Bunches basically making the argument that too much choice is problematic, and that
Too much choice in media.
in media in streaming, right? And so when he
Okay.
says the future is passive, the general argument is that there's a line of
Oh,
thinking
yeah,
that says
yeah.
less choice is better, and I think that's profoundly interesting in a world where the tagline, the selling point for everything is that you can
Have it
choose.
your way.
You
Have
have
it
it your
your
way,
way.
right? I mean,
Yeah,
like the
have
world
it
has
your way.
become one giant Burger King slogan.
Yeah, absolutely. Have it your way. So interestingly enough, yeah, no, I think yeah, let's stay a moment in the high order gloss before we start reading,
Sure.
before we start reading. Not too long, but I just wanted to say I just wanted to remark on I like your insight. How about that? I want to
Yeah.
say I like your insight because um it is counterintuitive, and I guess that's one of the reasons we were sort of gravitating to it. That Sonny Bunch articulates in this, the not so conventional or not so standard idea for a guy who is very media savvy. But his idea is that, contrary, I think this is the basic idea here, and Michael's already given a taste of it. The basic idea here is that contrary to almost everything else the internet tells you and the social media tells you and our practice with social media tells you, where it's all about individual choice, curation, uh, everyone their own curator, everyone their own playlist maker, that type of
Right,
thing.
right.
That actually there's a part of us that
The,
strongly yearns to sit back and just watch something
so here's I'm gonna say
and
this, and
resist choice and resist
right,
the
and
world of
I
infinite
think I
choice.
think the crux of the argument, and I'm gonna take this shot at it, and you can tell me if you agree, and then we can get in and unpack it.
Yeah.
But the crux of the argument is that all of this choice that is dangled in front of us as an incentive
To stay
in
online,
right,
right?
that all of that choice, there's a cost for it that may be too much to pay, and that we won't, and that cost is our attention, right? The choice takes attention. If I'm going to make a
And we get
choice,
anxious and we get
and
anxious.
that, yes, and there is, and that, and I think that at the core of this argument is that, hey, there's only so much of that to go around. And in the 24/7 nonstop world that we live in,
Mhm.
maybe the thing that we really want is not to have to make a decision or a choice, to just
Maybe
have that
that's
made for us.
yeah.
And it's funny because you would think that that would sit very uncomfortably or awkwardly in a discussion on streaming, but I think that there's merit to the discussion. So shall we jump in, or did you want to add?
Let's jump in. No, nothing to
Okay.
add. Let's jump.
So the plan is for me to read in my best radio voice.
Let's do it.
And Barry, by all means, jump in when you got something that piques your interest.
Oh, I will. I'm sure the interest will get piqued.
Okay, so this is The Future of Media is Passive by Sonny Bunch from April 12, 2024. And he says, the Criterion Channel, which I am a charter subscriber with a fancy metal ID tag to prove it, rolled out a new feature this week, Criterion 24/7. What is 24/7? I'll let them explain. And he says, don't know what to watch? Let us choose. Click on Criterion 24/7 and drop into a steady stream of must see movies anytime you want. As I type this, there's no way to see what movie is actually playing on the channel, which is a mild problem if you hop into a film midway, love it, and decide you like to start it over from the beginning. So, just a quick break here. This is basically programming without a TV guide, without
Programming without a TV guide, but it is what I heard in the podcast that accompanies this. Bunch refers to this as linear streaming. So it's the model of the TV. How's it different from old time TV programming? There's no program. You don't know what you're watching.
right.
So
So the
yeah,
difference is if you jump back, what, 30 years, you knew what was on when and
because
where.
there was a guide.
Right. And now you know where the 24/7, the
You know
Criterion
where
24/7,
to tune in to stream
but there's no way of actually knowing what it is they're playing unless I guess you catch the credits.
unless you catch the credits. But think about how odd that I mean, it is very counter to our understanding of streaming, that the positive aspects or the culture of streaming, where everything about streaming is we want to be able to rewind, so to speak. We want to be able to fast forward. We want to be able to change the damn times
And
or
that
the
doesn't seem to
the
be an
speed.
option here, right? There is no
It's
pause, there is
not an
no
option.
rewind.
That's the whole point about linear streaming. It's very damn linear. But it took me a while to get this because I'm so brainwashed as we all are. We're
Hmm.
programmed for this. And I almost say brainwashed, but so programmed. But linear streaming is an oxymoron. The whole point of streaming is to not be linear.
Yes.
The whole point of streaming is to not be temporally, there have no linearity about it, either temporally or in any other way, right? So linear streaming is a lot like saying, I don't know, name your oxymoron, sweet pain. These things shouldn't fit together. But what he's going to argue for
No,
is the
sweet pain
power of
works
linear
here.
streaming.
That's exactly right. That's his
Yes, it
point, is that
does.
these constraints
Yeah.
are what we really want.
Uh, Go ahead and finish that rest of
Okay.
the paragraph,
So,
and then I have one or two things to say.
all right. So as I type this, there's no way to see what movie is actually playing on the channel, which is a mild problem if you hop into a film midway, love it, and
Right,
decide you'd like to start over from the beginning. But
right.
maybe this is designed to mimic the movie houses of Martin Scorsese's youth, where he'd wander into a Western midway through, sit through the end, and watch the beginning as it began to replay. So, but I don't know that that's a fair comparison there because
Mhm.
I don't sense that the Criterion 24/7 isn't replaying the same episode or the same movie.
Well, do we know that?
Well, I have to assume that given don't know what to watch, let us choose, drop into a steady stream of must-see movies. So I mean, I'm unfortunately I don't know
Oh,
about Criterion 24/7 personally, but if there's a steady stream, that wouldn't be the same thing over and over.
oh yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. I'm sure that's the case. I was just wondering whether or not if you tuned in the next day, do they repeat the programming? I mean, maybe this is
see,
off
this is poor podcasting at this point
because
because we
it's poor podcast because we don't know. Would it matter? Well, how about let's deal with that speculation. Let's say that
well,
okay, if you tuned in today on the Criterion 24/7 channel and name your movie, Michael. What's your favorite art house movie? Well, I'm going to do it. Wild Strawberries by Ingmar Bergman.
wow,
You
okay.
wandered into the middle of it. You wandered into the middle of it. You watch and okay, but let's assume you haven't seen it before. So you're just watching, and why would you? I don't know why you would watch it, but I guess you have a taste for the Criterion Channel, and you know this is a black and white film, and hopefully, and you're guessing it's Ingmar Bergman, and you're gonna stick with it. But anyway, so would it matter? I mean, it kind of would make a difference if they
Well,
never
here's the
did this
problem.
again
If you're gonna
in the movie stream.
if you're gonna tune in tomorrow to try and catch the same thing again,
Yeah, what if it's there? Does that change your experience?
profoundly, it's a totally different experience because I think contextually it's totally different. You're in a new day.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
there's
Okay.
Scorsese gets to sit in the same seat at the same time, carry the end over to the beginning, and sort of retroactively piece things together. It
Yeah.
becomes a different version of the same thing, but it's in that same time. It's a different experience of the movie than watching it start to finish because you're
Sure.
watching it
Sure.
middle to end again. But no, it's a totally different thing. Add to the fact that what are you supposed to do? Look at your watch, say, well, I sat down at 9:30 and it seemed like it was probably about halfway
Yeah,
through.
that's what
You know,
exactly.
it,
That's where I was going to go. It's like how you don't know if the movie's going to end, right? You don't
so
know when the movie's going to end.
well,
Um,
and more importantly, you don't know when the movie's going to start.
and that
Like
too.
you don't have so I don't
Right.
know. That seems
Well,
awkward.
let me make well, now you're bringing up you're raising interesting questions, and I need to check out the Criterion 24/7 channel to get some answer to these questions. But let me pull back a little bit.
Yeah.
Let me pull back a little bit and just sort of talk about this in general and try to make sense. Because you're right, there's a little bit of a tension from, he goes very quickly, Sonny Bunch goes very quickly to the Martin Scorsese example, or really the example of any young man or woman or whatever, any young moviegoer um, who was watching at what used to be called afternoon TV, where after most and this was syndicated programming rather than national programming. So if you're watching a syndicated channel in the afternoon, they would often have their own homegrown movies that they were watching, that they were screening. And so I think you're right to say that there is something about this particular experience of the afternoon movie matinee watcher that isn't quite the experience of the Criterion 24/7. But let me see if I can sort of pull them together. And I think why Bunch does go to that, makes that analogy, is because he thinks in both cases, streaming, in both cases, the programming goes against our desire to have a narrative. that you are immersed in film in a very different way. You're experiencing non-narrative film. And um, can I say one more thing, or do you want to make a comment
No,
there?
absolutely. But
Uh,
go ahead.
okay, well, just real quickly. So I think, I agree with you, Michael, that the Scorsese example perhaps doesn't fit perfectly with what's going on in 24/7, but I think the key and why he makes the nodal point and why he makes the comparison, why Sonny Bunch makes the comparison, is because he thinks what Scorsese's experience in a way is a non-narrative experience of film. And if you're experiencing film in a where you're no longer concerned or able to follow the linear narrative, then what happens? Chances are you have a kind of, instead, it's possible that you will have a more dreamlike, a more intense, a more immersive experience of film. Now, we can talk about that, whether or not that's true, but I think the implication is that young Martin Scorsese, because he didn't understand the story, was able to lose himself in the images on the screen and think, here I am, a young person, and I'm watching this, I'm watching these cowboys on the screen. I'm looking at the pictures of the Old West, and you kind of go, you're kind of taken out of yourself. And there's a way in which it's acting, the film is acting on you, on your attraction to the film. The film is eliciting sort of irrational responses as well as rational responses. And just one last thing. When I read this example, I flashed back to the surrealist who made a practice, a conscious avant-garde artistic practice of leaving movies, not even midway through. In fact, the surrealist movie going is you would go to a theater, and as soon as you go there with your friends, it's very social, right? You go there with your fellow surrealist. As soon as you feel you understand the plot of the movie, you leave. And then you go to another movie. And then as soon as you understand the plot for that movie, you leave. So it suggests, now arguably, I think this is doesn't necessarily token a shallow response to film. But it's another kind of response to movies and images where you're sort of encouraging this immersion because you don't have access to the narrative.
So, couple things for you. Um, I while we're talking, I just Googled Criterion 24/7, and it's very interesting because their webpage just says, "What's on now,
That's it.
sweetie? Watch live or more." And then next film starts in 78 minutes.
They don't say
So
next. No, they
so
don't
that's
say
it.
that.
But I was thinking about this as you were talking. I think that, first of all, it's important to note that this type of programming, specifically the Criterion Movie Channel, not just this linear style, but a Criterion channel, is going to appeal to a very specific demographic that is
Very, very
unlike
true. Very
a
true.
lot of other watchers. So this idea of nostalgia, I think, is a thing here that I'm going to come in. But one of the things that occurred to me, and Bunch gets to this a little bit later, so I'm not going to dig too deeply into it. I just kind of want to put this here as a placeholder to return to, is that I think that as you were talking about with the surrealists, the value here isn't necessarily in watching the whole movie.
Sure, sure.
I think there's an aspect here where the value is in watching a movie
Absolutely.
in a way that was put
Right,
before you. So
right,
you get a
right.
chance to be a consumer of something of quality or value because there's a certain amount of cachet to the Criterion name, but you're not burdened with making the choice. And in a way, I think that the full narrative is a burden that I don't want to have to think about everything. Pardon me. That I can just come in and sort of passively view it. And I think that really at the core of this is this notion of passive consumption, which he gets to. So I'll
Yeah,
continue.
yeah. Yes.
Um,
But let me say briefly, this is not going to be a long discussion thread, I promise, but you just mentioned a major difference, I think, between Criterion 24/7 and say the Surrealists. And I would say also Scorsese or
Right.
any child of the 50s watching even if he's watching, as he did, Italian cinema, what we would now call art house cinema.
Right.
Even in those cases, see, if you're well, first off, if you're watching Criterion 24/7, you're paying for the damn thing. It's not free.
Right.
But also, who's paying for it? Well, you're paying for it because you believe in quality film. And you know that whatever is being shown, I don't care what it is, at whatever point of that 24/7, you know it's
See now,
quality art house film. Now, the Surrealist had no concern about
quality.
artiness of film or
Right.
aestheticism.
But
Right.
I'm gonna say I think there's a challenge to this notion of quality that's important to note here. Let's jump in and
Please,
we'll go and we'll see where this goes.
please. Yeah,
Okay,
please
so
continue.
he says, I'm ambivalent about whether or not the Criterion Channel should put together a listing a la TCM so people can plan their viewing. Surprise is part of the charm, but they definitely need to figure out a way to let people know what precisely they're watching while they're watching it. And apparently, Criterion has addressed that because we know what's playing now. We just don't
Yeah,
know what's coming
yeah,
next.
yeah.
Anyways,
Right.
that said, I'm fascinated by this development because it echoes something I discussed with the entertainment strategy guy last weekend on the podcast, namely the trend streaming services are making towards more linear style options for folks who are overwhelmed by options and just want to throw something on. We've talked about this a little bit
Just want to
already.
throw something on.
I think streaming customers are faced with option overload, leading to analysis paralysis, leading to annoyed scrolling that culminates in them just turning on something they've seen 100 times before. So here it is, right? Just turn it on. And something that you can be assured is going to be worth your time. Streamers, particularly the free ad supported streaming services like Pluto or Tubi, understand that what some folks are looking for is a return to the days of basic cable when you could throw on TBS and watch Demolition Man from the midway point or some random episode of Seinfeld or MASH.
Right, right.
At least part of what's happening here is the streamer's desire for their programming to represent something like the background noise TV used to represent, something you have on while you're cooking or sending emails or fiddling around on your phone. This is why you occasionally hear stories from creators who are asked by Netflix to make their shows a little less complicated so folks can follow along while they're scrolling Instagram. Now, this does not seem like the same kind of programming that you would find on Criterion 24/7, right?
Right,
This idea, I'll go
right.
one more
Right, right,
section
right.
through here and we'll talk.
Sure,
I've heard from
sure.
showrunners who are given notes from streamers that, quote, this isn't second screen enough. Justine Bateman told the Hollywood Reporter last year during the strikes, quote, meaning the viewer's primary screen is their phone and the laptop, and they just don't want anything on your show to distract them from their primary screen, because if they get distracted, they might look up, be confused, and go turn it off. So this is where this is really interesting to me. The argument that we want linear streaming to relieve us of the burden of choice, but we want linear streaming
To be
that is
ambient,
suitable
be
for a
ambient and
second
atmospheric.
screen
Yeah,
that
yeah.
won't distract me. In
That
other
seems
words,
new. That
that
seems
won't take my attention.
yeah,
So
that
I
seems
want something that I can ignore. Now, I find it perverse that we're willing to pay for quality programming that is choice free, right? The choices are made for me. I don't know what's next. I think it's a
right,
cool idea,
right.
but that I'm willing to pay for this. And
Right.
the appeal would be, hey, quality programming, something that's going to be worth your time that you can ignore.
You're
And
I
the argument
go
there
ahead.
has
Yeah.
to be some sort of like what? Nostalgia? Like I know this already, so I don't have to pay
No,
attention
you
to
know
it.
what? I mean, I thought you're giving me a new insight into the essay and maybe a darker insight into the essay. So, before, and especially because both listened to the podcast as sort of with the I'm afraid I don't know his real name, but he goes by the entertainment strategy guy. So the conversation with Sonny Butch and the entertainment strategy guy. Um, in the podcast, there are a lot of references to nostalgia, to
Hmm.
the kind of nostalgia for the early 90s moment when you could just sort of flip on um, I'm trying to remember the Chicago network.
TNT.
TNT, yeah, old style TNT, and either see and usually see a movie, and the movies were kind of replaceable and kind of background noise, but um, so I thought this was a kind of nostalgia for the 90s that was being expressed in the essay. But as you read it this time, I'm thinking there's something newer and something genuinely novel that Sonny Bunch is describing that I'm not quite sure he's registering the full novelty of it. I'm going to try to describe it. You tell,
Hmm.
and I think you are already describing it. So the desire for linear streaming doesn't seem to be nostalgia as we initially I was thinking. Here's it seems to be something the desire it's a desire for something closer to um ambient music. So
Yeah, that's good.
going back to the origins of ambient music, Eric Satie in the 1880s or 90s, not exactly sure when he does his major manifestos, but I do remember like the slogan was, and he was a kind of an early manifesto, modernist manifesto kind of guy. And it's like, this is music for furniture. This is music that, is meant to be furniture in the room. It is not meant for this, for a specific, it's meant for distracted listening. It's
Hmm.
meant for distracted listening. And so there have been, scores of composers. And of course, somebody like Brian Eno has made entire, a lot of electronic musicians, as well as, I guess, modern composers have sort of run with this idea of writing a music that is basically environmental and is also it can be easily forgotten. It's not just non-narrative. It's not meant to be ever processed as a narrative. It's meant to be processed as an environment. So I don't know, Michael, that seems new. This desire for a visual programming that we can look at that is the equivalent of ambient music for us to put it on and not pay attention to it.
Well, it's see the difference.
Is that new?
I
Or maybe
well,
it's not, right? Elvis had, when I think about Elvis, Elvis had several TV screens going all the time and he was paying attention to none of them. So, and
but
they
so
were
to
always
me,
on
the
24/7.
the
So
word the word that's jumping out to me instead of being ambient, it's like this is about distraction that isn't distracting, which is similar to that. But the word that keeps jumping out at me here is content, right? Like this is,
contentless content?
yeah,
Is
in a
it?
way, right? It's like the people who are doing this, the people who have realized that this is a thing, understand that your attention is at a premium, right? Like we're being hailed by a million different things here. And I need you to sign up, pay for this thing. But I understand that what you really want is like, okay, this is going to be really, again, this is like my exercise in poor podcasting. It's like a thingless thing, right? I need to give you something that is worth your money, but
Hmm.
that doesn't violate your attention while still filling this weird gap because we want to be bored, we want to relax, but we don't know how. And so I need to provide you with something that will function as a second screen for you, right? Like you're not paying attention to this, but you need something. So it's content that has to fill a void without distracting you.
Hmm.
And that's a really strange. So I get, so this idea of linear streaming, like it works great. We were talking earlier about this, right? Like the reason that sitcoms could play in that linear format is
Hmm.
because you get 30 minutes where we're going to recognize the characters. We understand implicitly the general idea behind the show, but we're not bothered by the arc of the narrative,
Right, right.
right? So I can laugh at a gag, I can recognize something, but I'm not bothered by trying, like, I don't have to invoke memory in any way. I can just be present for this
Mhm,
thing or
mhm,
not be present. It doesn't matter because what's going to follow this is not tethered to what this is. It's going to be a different episode from a different season. It might, so like, there's no need for continuity,
mhm,
right? So I can just be bothered. And so what Criterion, I guess, is doing is giving us that same thing. Look, you can jump in, you can watch this movie if it's interesting. So it's the same thing, like, oh, Seinfeld's on or Friends is on or whatever my sitcom
mhm,
is. I understand generally what it is. Yes,
mhm,
that would be suitable for background for me. It
mhm.
doesn't matter which version of it I get. Um,
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
so I just think that the big thing here is this attention, and attention is tied to memory. And so we want to connect, we want to provide something that fills space, but that doesn't tax our actual cognitive faculties in any meaningful way here.
Well, I have a closing question for you, and a closing question for myself. But before I ask you and me the closing question.
Shall we finish
Oh,
before we get too close? Shall we just,
oh, oh, oh,
there's
did
just
you?
one
I thought you
short
finished.
paragraph following up here
No,
before
no,
we.
no. Do that, do that, do that, please.
Okay, so Bateman told the Hollywood Reporter last year during the strikes, the viewer's primary screen is their phone and laptop, and they don't want anything on your show to distract them from their
Mhm.
primary screen, because if they get distracted, they might look up, be confused, and turn it off. Now, obviously, I'm not comparing the Criterion channel to Netflix. I imagine the sort of person who tunes in to a linear stream in the hopes of catching a random Ozu is different from the sort of person who tunes into a linear stream in order to hear someone shout "Bazinga." Fair.
There.
But I do think there's a latent yearning out there for a removal of control, a voice in the dark, just giving us something to watch rather than asking us to choose what to watch. The future resembles the past a little more every day.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So actually, I'm very glad you read that paragraph because my question before the final wrap-up question or comment before the final wrap-up question was that I was thinking the more you were talking about the particular parameters of um, of this new contentless content or um, the more I thought it's not going to work for Criterion for the actual. I mean, isn't it, or rather, it's easier for me to imagine that the Criterion watcher is going to tune into Sweetie, as you were saying. They're going to tune into Sweetie midway through. They're going to say, "This is awesome. I'm going to go back to the Criterion channel and see." And sure enough, they'll be able to watch it in a linear fashion. So in a way, Criterion, it maybe I don't know what I'm saying about the Criterion 24/7. Maybe it's just an advertisement for Criterion programming. It's a way to get people into their programming. And it's not necessarily functioning as the brain candy that Sonny Bunch is thinking. That maybe it's just in the minds of the Criterion people, it's a way of helping people make conscious choices later on.
I think there's
What do you
something,
think about what do you think about that?
I
I'm
think,
putting that forward. I don't I'm I'm spitballing here. I like to hear
so
from you.
here's what I'm thinking. I think there's something to that, right? Like, if you think so, he references someone shouting "Bazinga," right? That's a reference to the Sheldon character in The Big Bang Theory. Those television shows, right, are pretty. I mean, they're formulaic. You know the show before you see it. They're character driven in the sense that these characters are all representative of a certain type, and that's fine. Um, but they're loud, they're jarring, they're vacuous, right? So the analog to Bazinga would have been, Seinfeld with Kramer's entrance as he walks in
Sure,
and he's
sure,
our
sure.
starter. But there's a certain, it doesn't take any attention to watch that, but at the same time, it's somewhat jarring. I think that what Criterion offers you is something that can be, in a way, more passive because it's not going to have the gag at the core of its arc, right? Um, that it's telling a story that you can choose to engage with or not. You can just leave it on. So in a way, this is to get back to your idea about furniture music, ambient music, right? There's something about the sitcom that is so gag central you can watch it without having to think. There's something about, I think, some of these older movies that are maybe less intent on grabbing your attention for a short moment and more just continuous background noise. And hey, if you want to watch it, that's great. You can hop in and watch it. But I don't get the sense that any of this type of programming is designed for movie night
Mhm,
so much
mhm,
as it's
mhm.
designed to just be on.
Okay. Well, maybe it's time now for the closing question.
Okay.
And you go first.
So I mean, I don't, the
Well,
thing
I
that
have a closing question for you. You have one for me, in which case I'll ask you my closing
go ahead
question
for
for you.
let's
Or no,
what
no.
do you have for me? Because
Here's my closing question for you. So, Sonny Bunch invokes young Martin Scorsese watching the television in the afternoon with mom, and getting into Italian art cinema, sort of, I guess unconsciously, like osmosis, because
mhm.
that's the word I'm struggling for. And then the specific example he gives is Scorsese at the midnight, at the, not the midnight movie, but the afternoon matinee or morning matinee. Okay. Um, I mentioned Eric Satie and the Surrealist. So, but you also said that seems to be something kind of new about this, in that when we started describing how this contentless content, I'm using your phrase again because I really love it. When we start describing how this content works, there seems to be something really kind of apposite to the moment about it. It seems to be somehow reflecting our particular moment of
Mhm.
distraction. Now, yes, we can talk about the surrealist, or I can name drop, but there seems to be something really, really of the moment for this particular kind of distracted viewing. All right. So my big question for you is this: Criterion Channel, Criterion 24/7, repetition or difference?
You mean
Repetition
is this
or
as he's
difference?
suggesting, hey, this is looking like the past more and more. Is it the past or is it something
He
new?
says that. He says that. Yes. I mean, I think he would say, if I pose that question, well, obviously, the whole energy behind this is to say, I think this is actually, in fact, tell me if I'm right, Michael. I think he's bullish on this idea. And I think one of the reasons he's bullish on it is that he does think it's a return to a more sane, more positive viewing practice. So, I mean, I think if I asked him that question, he would say repetition.
Yeah, so I think
So,
that
but what I'm asking Dr. Michael Rapici is repetition. I'm using the Deleuze
yeah,
Guattari, and they would say repetition and difference. And of course, the truth is repetition and difference. But I think it's worth. I'd like to hear your answer to. I think Sonny Bunch would say, well, it's more repetition than difference, and that's
I
why I like it. And so I'm curious.
I
What
think it looks like that on the surface. I think it's easy to look at this and say, this is the realization that we want to go back. I don't think that's it at all. I think that this is an acknowledgement that we are in a new place, that we've never been before. That where every day we are inundated with more choice, more options. And as I alluded to this at the beginning, there's a cost for this, right? I can only attend to so many things at once, but we have to keep the machine going. Notice this isn't criteria 12/6. This is
Oh
24/7. This is
no,
all the time. So,
that which is of the Stiglerian moment.
yeah,
It's
very much
of
so.
the
So,
moment.
I think this is an acknowledgement that we are here, that there's a cost, but I think this is also a tacit acknowledgement that there's a cost for where we are, that 24/7 choice is a real problem. And that in a way, we've got this paralysis by analysis. And if I'm going to give you all these choices because you have so many options, you're not likely to choose me. So, in a way, I don't know if this will be successful or not, but I think it's a pretty self aware move to say, look, you want TV, you want something that's not going to be overwhelming for you. You want choice, subscribe or don't, right? But I'm going to give you something that you can ignore. So the realization here is that
Because you don't have to concentrate on.
you can ignore, right?
Yeah.
I'm fully understanding that you've got other things that you need to watch. You've got other things that you want to attend to. So I think there's the nod to the current situation. It's on all the time. You don't have to worry what's next, because let's be fully honest with ourselves here. What's next doesn't matter. If it's interesting, you'll watch it. If it's not, as long as it's not distracting, you'll leave it on. I'm glad this is a great question. I'm going to go back to move forward for a second. Think about Wikipedia, right? And I get into a version of this conversation all the time with my students. The wonderful thing about Wikipedia is the wormhole. You'll jump into reading one thing, and then you are so far away from that initial point of inquiry half an hour later, because one thing just got you thinking about something.
Linked.
You know, the magic of the hyperlink is astounding.
The magic
right?
of the hyperlink.
So it's this sort of, I'm in this place, but I don't care what's next. It's whatever's interesting to me. So then you think about, what has social media brought us? Well, it's whatever's next. And I'm going to forget about what came before this. I'm just going to keep scrolling through. So social media wouldn't work if we knew what was next at all. Because now I got to think, am I interested in this or not? Just show me. And if it's good, I'll keep going. If it's not good, I'll skip on, but I'm not going to put my phone down. Right. And so I think that's what this is. I think it's this understanding that you don't want to know what's next.
Dr. Michael Rapici, you are a poet tonight.
I think in order for this to work, though, it needs to be, sort of in little niche moments where we understand what makes Criterion work is there's a certain level of quality control. Right. So there have to be, I think, some bumpers to separate content, to say, hey, look, my contentless content is of a certain flavor from the world at large, because that's what we want. Is we want the idea that somebody else is making a choice for us. So there is some filtering mechanism in place. It's just not my problem.
Good place to end, Michael.
All right. Well, Barry, this was fun. Thank you.
Yeah, it was fun.
All
Great
right.
to have this conversation.
All right,
Thank
Barry,
you.
take care.
Thanks for listening to the Critical Media Studies podcast. To find out more about the show, check out our webpage at criticalmediastudiespodcast.com.